Welcome, Community Christian. I am so glad you're here at the beginning of this new series. There is no better time for you to start coming to church than at the start of a series. And this is a series that I think has the potential to change things for some of you. Some of you really struggle with the idea of God and whether or not that He can be trusted. Now, I don't mean you struggle with whether there is a God or whether there's someone out there somewhere. I think most of us believe that. What I'm talking about is the idea that if there is a God, can you trust Him, He, she, it, with your life? I wind up talking to a lot of people who even would tell me they follow Jesus, but when it comes to their ideas about the God that Jesus called Father, the ideas they have about God are so different and so messed up that they have a really hard time living their lives the way that Jesus said they could live, with the love and joy and peace and patience and kindness that Jesus wants to give them. I mean, maybe you grew up in church and you grew up with an idea of God and you don't really know where it came from, and then you went off to college, or you moved away after you got out of high school, you got away from your parents, and you moved in with somebody, you had a roommate, somebody that you thought was really smart, you were sort of attracted to them, and before you knew it, this smart person began to shoot a lot of holes in the faith and the God that you sort of knew as a kid. And now you're left with these ideas about God that don't really help you anywhere. I can't tell you how many times I wind up having conversations with somebody and they'll describe to me their struggle with God, and that they just aren't sure that they can trust Him with this thing in their life or this situation in their life or with their life in general. And so at some point in the conversation, if I have time, I'll just say to them, hey, why don't you describe to me the God that you're thinking about, the God that you have a hard time trusting? And when I'll hear them talk about a God that is sort of capricious and does whatever He wants to, and they don't understand the decisions they make, and they talk about a God who's ready to punish them for any little slip up they have, or the God who judges people harshly, a God that's ready to hurl people into hell. When I hear about the kind of God that they describe, I'll often say to them, I don't blame you. I couldn't trust that God either. Can I tell you about the God that I wish you knew? Well, that's what I'm hoping to do in this series. Over the next few weeks, Jason and I are hoping to describe to you the God that's described by Jesus in the Bible, the God that Jesus came to be the exact representation of, the God that Jesus Himself is God, that He comes and He shows us the exact picture of God. I want to try for you to understand who that God is. We want to talk to you about some of His character traits. And over the next few weeks, as we describe who He really is, what I'm hoping will happen is that you will be attracted to Him, and you will want to get to know Him and draw close to Him. Even if you already have made a commitment to follow Jesus, that you'll be attracted to God, and it'll sort of begin to unravel some of the problems that you're having in your life. I mean, surveys tell us that way more than 94% of Americans believe that there is a God. But when they come down to feeling close to that God, when they feel like they're in a relationship with that God, that's not the same thing. But Jesus' brother James, he writes a book in the New Testament of the Bible, and he says, if you'll draw near to God, He'll draw near to you. So over the next few weeks, I'm hoping that we can describe a God that you will want to draw near to, and what you're going to find is that as you do, He'll draw near to you, and it could totally begin to change your life. Now, how I want to kick this whole thing off in the introduction of this series today is I want to talk to you, I want to show you a guy in the Bible, in the older part of the Bible, who is trying to do for people in his day exactly what I'm hoping to do in this series. This guy's name is Elijah, and he's a prophet of God. Now, we don't use that phrase, prophet of God, much anymore. When you do, it means something different to you. All it really meant for them was he was a guy who spoke for God to the people. He's a guy who stood up and tried to draw people back to God. In a lesser way, it sort of is really what I try to do. He's in a situation where he lives in a country where everybody in that country knew that at one point in time they had been chosen. Their country, their race, their people, the nation of Israel had been chosen by God. There had been a covenant built between them and God. God said, I'll be your God, you'll be my people. They'd both committed to it, and God had blessed them. God had brought them out of slavery. He'd given them a land that had already been developed by somebody else. He just gave it to them. But over time, where they are now, this generation of people, they've sort of lost contact with that covenant. They've sort of stopped believing that God is really for them. They've got ideas about God that are off track, and they don't believe that they can really trust Him. In fact, they've begun to trust a God that's in the culture of their day. There was a God named Baal, and Baal was the god over weather, they believed. He was the environmental god. He was the agricultural god. And in their day, you can sort of see why they might be attracted to this god Baal, because, in a society where everybody lived pretty much an agrarian society, that means they had to farm and they had to grow their own food, and they're trying to just live day to day and make enough. If you can have an in with the guy who controls weather, if you know when it's going to rain and you can control when the sun shines and you get your crops in and you get the right kind of weather that you can produce a lot to take care of your family, you can understand why they would want that kind of connection. But worship of Baal, it was a whole nother thing. Baal worship required that terrible things like child sacrifice. They literally would have to kill their children to offer as a sacrifice to this god Baal. Or they'd have to do things like, it involved temple prostitution with, often sex with girls at an age that would turn your stomach. Incredible things that required, cutting yourself and mutilating yourself to get the attention of this god. And here's this prophet Elijah. He's watched all of this go on. He still serves the God of the Bible, the God who made the covenant with him. He watches it about as long as he can, and he just can't take it anymore. He wants so badly for the people of his day to realize that there is a God, that the real God, the true God, the God who gave them his name, Yahweh, that God is not like this false God that requires stuff out of them without giving them anything. This God that Baal that's costing the people so much. So he stands in a public place and he basically throws down a challenge and challenges the prophets of Baal into a winner-take-all kind of cage match showdown so that the gods will show themselves and people will be able to decide who really is the God. They announce this kind of thing. This God showdown is going to take place on the most famous mountain in their country, so everybody can join there. It's on Mount Carmel. They're going to all come together. And this really is, after it gets announced, it's sort of like a combination of the World Series, World Cup, WrestleMania, Super Bowl, all rolled into one. It's the can't-miss event of their day. And the day finally arrives when they've set the time that they're all going to come together, and massive numbers of people show up for this event, including the king and the queen of the whole country. Representing Baal on one side are the entire priesthood of Baal worship. There are 450 of them, and the king and queen are standing with those prophets of Baal. And then standing for the God of the Bible, the God of the covenant, the God who had chosen Israel, there's just this one guy. His name's Elijah. The prophets of Baal are arrayed in all their religious garb so everybody knows who they are. And there's Elijah just standing in his street clothes all along. But Elijah's the first one to stand up, and he throws out the opening line. He says, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord's God, if Yahweh, if the God who called us, who gave Moses his personal name, who our fathers and our forefathers followed, if he is really God, then follow him. If the historical God is the real God, then follow him. But if Baal is God, if he proves to be the real God, then you should follow him." He's just saying, hey, something has got to be decided. Quit trying to dip your toe into a little bit of every God's water. Today's the day that you've got to decide who really is God and what he's really like and follow him. And so Elijah begins to explain the rules. He says, hey, look, we're each going to build an altar. We'll build them here in front of everybody. We'll get everything ready for the sacrifice. We'll each have an animal that'll be killed, and we'll lay it on the altars. We'll all pray prayers. Baal prophets, you pray the prayers to Baal, and if Baal answers, then everybody will be able to see it. He says, here's the deal, though. We'll get the altars ready, we'll get the sacrifices ready, but nobody gets to provide fire. What we'll pray is we'll pray that God will provide fire. If God is God, here's what the Bible just said, the way he says it. He says, the God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. He wins. Well, everybody agrees. That's pretty clear. Everybody will be able to see it. It'd be tough to rig a lightning strike from heaven just if you were a prophet. But again, it's like Elijah's letting them play on their home field advantage. Baal's the god of weather. Lightning shouldn't be a big deal to him. So he says, look, we're on your home field and it's really your tools, lightning. So why don't you guys go first? Now, from this point on, I'll just try to read what the Bible has to say, let it give you a play-by-play with no real much analysis from me. Here's what it says, verse 26. Then they called upon the nail of Baal, his priest do, from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, but there is no answer. They danced around the altar they had built. At noon, Elijah just can't resist. They've had all morning long, nothing's happening, so Elijah he gets into a good old-fashioned, trash talking. He says, hey, why don't you shout louder? Perhaps he's deep in thought, or perhaps, he's woke up with a little stomach distress and he's relieving himself, or perhaps he had to go on a trip, or maybe your God's asleep and you just need to wake him up from a nap. I mean, it's a hard day. Maybe it's a big day at the office and Baal's got a lot going on and he just hasn't noticed you yet. Why don't you talk a little bit louder? Well, that causes the prophets of Baal to just take it up a whole nother notch. They shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears. Notice the next 4 words. As was their custom, until the blood flowed. They continued their frantic appeals until evening fell, but there was no response. And then their time's up. I mean, they've had all day. They got there in the morning. They went to noon. They've had the rest of the afternoon. Now the sun has fallen. They've given it their best shot, and there's been no fire coming from Baal from heaven. So now it's Elijah's turn. And I can imagine that the tension is pretty high. And after all, it's 450 to 1, and the king and queen are on the side of the 450. But Elijah's quite a showman. In fact, the very next verse says that Elijah called them all to come near, and I think he wants them to come near because it's gotten dark and he wants them to see what he's going to do, but I think he also wants to talk to them. And it says he takes 12 stones, and if you don't know, the 12 stones are for the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's just the whole nation. He's just reminding them that there had come a time when God had called their forefathers, these 12 men who became the 4 leaders of their tribe, their nation, he called them out. And I bet when he put the stones down, he mentioned every tribe, looking up to catch people's eyes that he knew. He laid them around in an altar. And then it says, at that point, he reminded them that God had chosen them. And I bet the whole time he's reciting promises to them. He's saying to them, can you remember when God called our forefathers out of Egypt? He called them out of slavery. He blessed them with this land that we now live in. He gave it to them, houses other people had built. He's just saying stone after stone that God has promised us, and God has kept every promise he's given us. When he finishes with that, it says he digs a deep trench around the altar, and he begins to prepare the sacrifice. Now, let me just say right here, this animal sacrifice thing is really kind of weird to us, and it really bothers people in our day. But you just have to know, if you read any ancient history, the sacrifices to gods in their day were pretty normal. And the true God, he's just working within their culture so that they can understand. And I've already told you that, in their culture, child sacrifice was pretty normal to Baal. But the God of the Bible, when he calls the nation of Israel, he's already told them, you are not to offer your children before me. You cannot put them on the altar. Anybody that does that, he says, that's a grievous wrong. That's a terrible sin before me. That'll have to be paid for. God says, we'll use animal sacrifices. Something has to pay for the wrong that's gone on between me and you. Something has to make that right. Someone or something has to make that right. And it's really pretty hard, I think, to miss the contrast going on here. I bet as Elijah is laying that animal on the sacrifice, I wonder if he's not looking up at people that he's known since they were both little boys together, and he's saying, really, guys? You would take your precious child and you would do this to your child? When the God of the Bible, the God who loves us, the God of the covenant, he never asked that of you? What are you thinking? Now, let me just step out of the story for just a second and say to you, this whole idea of sacrifice, it's been my experience that almost everybody I meet, with whatever idea they have about God, they do have this idea that if they were to ever draw close to God, that it would require some sacrifice on their part. That it'd be something they'd have to get right, they'd have to get straight, that there'd be something they'd have to change, there'd be something that they would have to fix in order to be able to draw near to the God as they understand him, to whoever God is. And in fact, most people I know think They can't come just as they are, the way they are, that they have to fix something, they have to clean up somehow, they have to change something about themselves. And that's this whole idea of sacrifice. I mean, the average person believes that if God were ever to make a way, that God would expect you to do the work to get right before you draw near to Him. Now, of course, later, for those of us who follow Jesus, we know that what Elijah is doing here with the sacrifice, what Elijah is doing is he's just foreshadowing what God's going to do Himself in Jesus. I mean, the nation of Israel that Elijah's calling back, they're going to be the one to bring Jesus into the world. And that in Jesus, God Himself is going to come and God's going to be the sacrifice. He's going to make the sacrifice so that we can come to Him. And the sacrifice that He makes, it makes the way so that we can come, that we can draw near to Him, and that what Jesus did on the cross by offering His life, it becomes the sacrifice that makes a way for human beings to come to Him, which provides the opportunity for us to come to God just as we are, to be accepted where we are, to come to Him and to draw near to Him as He draws near to us. I have a very hard time believing it, but surveys again and again say that because of his age in our day, when I say the name Billy Graham, many of you may not even really know who that is. If you find yourself in that number, let me tell you, from the late 1940s to around 2005, Billy Graham was the most shining example of Christianity in our world. I mean, Billy Graham traveled around the world talking about the love of God, about this God that he wished people knew. He talked to leaders in the world. He spoke on almost every country on this planet, and he talked to millions of people about God. Twice in my life, I've had a chance at different levels to be part of Billy Graham crusades. In 1994, when Billy last came to Atlanta, I was a part of the whole thing. I wasn't a big part. I was just a little part of putting that whole thing together when he came to the Georgia Dome back when it was new, and tens of thousands of people came to that event. I remember sitting in the seats of the Georgia Dome as Billy got up and he talked about God and the way that God had made a sacrifice, and God had come Himself in Jesus, that He had offered Himself as a sacrifice to make a way between us and between human beings and God. The way that we could be made right with God, a way that we could come to God. And then he said to everybody at the end of this message, he said, so today, if you want to come and you want to accept the sacrifice that God has already made so you can come, if you just come out of your seats wherever you are in this stadium, hundreds of thousands of people, he said, you just come, even from the upper deck, you come down to this football field where I am standing in the middle, and you receive the sacrifice that God has made. Now, at that point, like they had done for 60 years, this huge choir that was sitting behind Billy, they stood up and we all stood up, and he said, hey, as we sing, if you're led to come and accept this sacrifice, you come right now. And then the choir began to sing. And if you don't know, they always sang the exact same song. And the words of that song became, for many people in my generation, the words that reminded us of who God is. They said, just as I am, without one plea, but that your blood, Jesus' blood, was shed for me. And that you bid me, that you, God, called me to come to thee. O Lamb of God, I come. I remember that night sitting in that building as I watched thousands of people come from everywhere in that stadium. And they came and they received the sacrifice that God had made for them. As I said earlier, almost everybody I know thinks that if there's a way that they're going to be made right, draw near to God, there's going to have to be a sacrifice made. They know that in some ways they've disappointed God. I mean, they know they've disappointed God, because the truth is, even if you don't agree with all the rules that God's made, you know that you've disappointed yourself. You haven't lived up to your own standards. You're disappointed in the way you've lived your relationships, in the way you've lived your life, in the way that you haven't done even things that you said you would never do. You're disappointed in yourself, and you know that if there's any way to make that right, you're going to have to make a sacrifice. But the God I wish you knew says, no, you can come just as you are, just where you are. That you come because the sacrifice has already been made in Jesus. You just have to come and accept it. Without one plea, you come. Well, back to Elijah. He's standing on the mountain. He's dug the trench around the altar, and it's the moment of truth. Here's what it's written. Elijah said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Do it again. Do it a 3rd time," he ordered. And they did it a 3rd time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench. You have any idea what he's doing here? I mean, do you get what he's doing by drowning the altar in water? In just a moment, Elijah's going to pray, and he's not going to do like the prophets of Baal. He's not going to cut himself. He's not going to abuse himself. He's not going to yell out in loud voices. It's not going to take him a long time. He's just going to talk to God in a normal voice. And those of us who know Jesus, who follow Jesus, remember Jesus said to us, hey, you don't have to use any special words. You don't have to recant certain kind of prayers. It's not the words that you say. You just talk to God in a normal kind of voice. When you get ready to draw near to God, you don't have to come to Him with a special way and with special words. You don't have to come to the church. You don't have to find a pastor to pray for you. You just pray to God. You in your heart begin to say words to Him. You open yourself to Him and God will draw near to you. Well, once Elijah has swamped this altar with water, when he prays in just a moment and fire comes down from heaven, nobody's going to be able to say, hey, he had a match hitting somewhere. Elijah's just making clear that what they're about to see is what the God of the Bible does when people call on Him. So here comes Elijah's prayer. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all of this at your command. O Lord, answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God and that you have brought them back to yourself. And that's what his whole prayer is about. That's what this display of power he's asking for is about. Not so he can have something, but so that people around him can know the God that he knows. He knows that if they knew God, it could change everything. If they could see God for who He really is, it could change everything in their life. Everything would change. Immediately, the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And I bet you can guess what happens next. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." Yes, the Lord, He is God. The reflex response of anybody when they finally see who God, as He really is, the God that He wants you to know, is to bow down and worship. Now, maybe you're wondering, I mean, I have people ask me sometimes, well, I get why people like that understood and why they fell down. I mean, if I could see a display of power like that, I'd probably follow God too. And maybe you're wondering, why does God do jaw-dropping displays of power like that? My answer when people ask me why that kind of jaw-dropping power doesn't get displayed regularly by God, I say to them, hey, if you could stand where I stand, if you could see what I see, you'd see that the God I know, He does displays of power all the time. And it's not like just lightning strikes. I mean, after all, I don't think if you're God, lightning strike takes all that much power. It's the kind of power that God displays when He slowly, lovingly, carefully, He changes people's lives and He untangles the mess that we've made of our lives slowly over time. It's when the God that I wish you knew, He takes a hateful person and turns him into a loving person. It's when He takes a person who's filled with prejudice and He makes him into an inclusive person. It's when He takes a person who's been, consumed with acquiring and He turns him into a generous person. It's when He takes a judgmental person and He makes him into a person that sees everybody the same and wants everyone to be included. It's when He takes a person that's hooked and addicted and they're chained to something that won't let them go and He begins to rebuild their life. It's when He takes people who've been lost in loveless relationships and over time, He slowly begins to build it into something that they never dreamed that their life could be. I think if you could stand where I stand, and you could see God take bitter people and turn them into forgiving people, if you could see Him taking people that have been broken so badly by what has happened in their life, and He begins to slowly over time rebuild them. The God I wish you knew, He does His best work in that way. I think of a guy in our church who was just this close to he was just so close to allowing alcohol to lead him right to the morgue and And then some friends of his did everything they could, and they got him into rehab, and eventually in rehab, he met God, and it changed everything. And then over the next few years, as God began, through the work of him doing the hard road of recovery, he began to entangle his life and rebuild his life. Now he worships at our church regularly, and he welcomes everybody to come just as they are. I think of an unbelievable show of God's grace and compassion in our church, and a friend of mine who was unbelievably abused as a child. And she was so broken and so torn apart that even counselors would say to me, she's never going to be healed this side of heaven. It's never going to get better. It's just, we're going to have to try our best to just help her cope. It's not going to get any better. But she leaned into God's power. She leaned into the fact that he was with her, that he was closer than the air that he breathed, that he would never leave her, that he would never forsake her. She leaned into his unlimited love and power to mend her past. And over time, God has repaired her life and built healthy, loving relationships again. All of which is just a testament to the limitless power of the God that I wish you knew. The truth is, many of you have seen it as well. You know the power and love of a God who takes us where we are and helps us become more than we ever thought we could be. But the truth is, many of you keep going back and forth between two choices. I feel like saying something to you like Elijah would say when he starts this whole thing. He says, how long will you keep going back and forth? How long will you waver? When will you decide that God is God? I've had friends joke me of how often I've said to some other friends of ours who keep dipping their toe in the water of God and they never fully get on board, and they're running after money, or they're running after possessions, or they're running after a drug, or they're running after addiction, or they're running after women, or they're running after something, but they want to do a little God and a little of this. They just keep trying to dip their toe in, and they can't figure what they go. Then I'll eventually say to them, I'll say, look, man, if you want money, then let go of the God rope and run after it hard. At least if you will run as hard as you can after it, then when you hit a wall, maybe you'll hit with so much speed, it'll blow things up and you'll never want to run that way again. If you want to run after the drug, if you want to run after the women, if you want to run after that stuff, run so hard that you hit with good enough speed that you no longer will go back and forth. And when that happens, maybe you can see the God that I wish you knew is ready to take you where you are, as you are, and build you into something that you honestly never thought that you could ever be. That's the God that I wish you knew. So what I want you to do as we end this introduction to this series is, if you would go ahead and you'd grab one of the connection cards that's nearby you, maybe it's in a cup holder, and you'd take a pen and you'd make sure you got your name in a way that we can contact you. And maybe it's weird to you if you're new here that we ask you to do this, but really, we really just want to thank you, and we want to pray for you. We pray for every one of these cards by name, and if you'd give us your name, we want to pray for you that God would continue to bless you and lead you in the relationship that as you draw near to Him. And maybe if you're already a follower of Christ, here's what I want to challenge you today as we start this whole series. Would you consider being bolder? Would you consider being bolder in our culture that's so confused about all gods being the same? Would you speak up louder for the God that you know? Would you draw more people and help them to know the God that you wish they knew, that could change everything for their lives? Maybe you're here and you find yourself being one of those people that you've just gone back and forth and a little bit of this and a little bit of God, and you keep trying to sort of play both sides. But today you realize that you need to take a stand. Here's what I want to encourage you to do. On the back of that card, there's a box that says, I want to make Jesus the leader of my life, and I want to be baptized. Now, here is why we say baptism. Baptism is where Jesus asks us to go public. Now, it's not for God. God knows whether we're public with Him or not. It's for you to go public. It's for you to publicly declare that you come right as you are, where you are, and that you publicly for God. And it's for you to publicly say to your family and friends, this is what I choose. Baptism is the public way where we stand before our family and friends and says, I'm choosing to follow Jesus. He's going to be the leader of my life. Now I'm going to ask you to do something today that in a way is our way of doing what Billy Graham I saw do years ago, where we asked people at that moment to take a stand and to come. Here's what I want to say to you. In just a moment, a very short moment, I'm going to close in prayer. And after I finish praying, there's going to be a video that'll come on, and it'll talk about communion, where we remember the sacrifice God made for us in Jesus. And then a song will begin to play. When that song begins to play, everybody's going to stand, and you're going to see some people leave their seats. They're going to help get ready to serve communion to us. Here's what I want to ask you to do. I want to ask you to take that card that you just filled out where you checked that you wanted to be baptized. I want you to walk out of your seat with those people, find somebody wearing a green shirt, and hand them that card. And they will help you take your next step in being baptized. It can begin to change everything with the God that you can know that will draw near to you. For everyone else, over the next few weeks, we're going to continue this series, and we're going to describe the Bible, in the God that's described in the Bible, the one that's made clear to us in Jesus. Not a distant, angry God who maybe you've heard about, not a God who gets kicks out of judging people and hurling them into some place far away from Him. We want to introduce you to a God that Jesus came to show us. And we'd like to reintroduce others of you to Him if you've gotten a little fuzzy on it. And I think if you'll come along for this series, if you'll be a part of every week of this series, you're going to be rocked afresh by the God that Jesus came to represent, the amazing God that we see in Jesus, that has the power to forgive and the power to heal and the power to mold your life and to shape it into something you can never dream. He has the power to overcome anything that's got you hooked. He has the power to unhook you from it and begin in a new way. He has the power to help you forgive and restore relationships that you've been estranged in from too long. I hope you'll come along for this ride and you'll come to know the God that I hope, that I wish you knew. I think God's going to do great things in this series. I hope you'll be a part of it. Let's bow together and I'll pray. Father, I pray right now that you would receive our worship for what you've done in our lives. God, I'm thankful for what I see, not in anybody else, but what you've done in me and given me the life that I certainly don't deserve and that I never dreamed that I could have. Thank you for the way that you've taken me, the blown up life that I had, and you've restored me. You've made me into something new. I thank you for the lives that I get to see, that you do that in still, that you're still at work in. I pray for the man or woman, the young person today, that today is their day and they need to take a stand. Today is the day that they go public. Would you help them, give them the courage in just a moment to let somebody know. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.